Dallas is home to what was once the largest gay congregation in America. And they've been evolving, moving into a more traditional denomination. And there are challenges that come with that, but also opportunities. How are they navigating those changes? The senior pastor of Cathedral of Hope, Neil Cazares-Thomas, will be with us on Good God. Stay tuned. Welcome to Good God, conversations that matter about faith and public life. I'm George Mason, your host, and I'm delighted to welcome to our program today my friend and colleague, Neil Cazares-Thomas.
It's always good to be in your company, George.
Thank you so much, Neil.
Great to be here.
Well, to introduce you a little further, we should say that Neil is the senior pastor of the Cathedral of Hope Church here in Dallas, a United Church of Christ congregation. And it has not always been so, but it has been for the last, about 12 years now, I guess. But the church itself has a remarkable story, a significant place in the history of Dallas and its religious community. Started in 1970, so you are coming up on your 50th anniversary before long in 2020, right?
Yep,
so,
yeah.
Remarkable. Well, and Neil has been the pastor, you've been the pastor here for it's been 3 years, a little more than 3 years, right?
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit, Neil, about what attracted you to Cathedral of Hope and something about its history and your sense of its place in the ecology of religious life in Dallas.
So as you say, Cathedral is nearly 50 years old. It was founded by a group of folks who had heard about a group of people who had started meeting in Los Angeles in California that Reverend Troy Perry had brought together after his sense of call and realization after leaving the Pentecostal church for numerous reasons, that God was speaking to him that it was time for God's gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender folk to find religious homes. And in that period, there were not many churches who were opening their doors openly to LGBT folks. And so he gathered this group of folks together in Los Angeles. And that particular congregation saw its mission as bringing this to other metropolitan areas in the United States. Right.
So it actually began as part of the movement called the Metropolitan Community Churches.
Yep. In 1968, and then a group of folks from Dallas went to meet with Troy in Los Angeles. And as is Troy's remarkable way, he basically said, "Here's a Bible, go preach." They returned to Dallas, and the 12 of them founded the Metropolitan Community Church of Dallas. And from that grew this incredible congregation, and for the Metropolitan Community Church is a worldwide denomination.
Right, and when you say grew, we really mean grew.
Yeah.
I mean, this church, which numbers now a membership of about 4,500 or so?
About 4,500, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
It took off in that first generation in a spectacular way, and has been a vibrant presence in the city all during that period of time. So, but then probably one of the most challenging periods of time, of course, was during the 1980s.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the scourge of HIV and AIDS and what that did to the community and its role in Dallas.
Well, if I may just back up just a little bit, because the interesting thing is, if you believe in for such a time as this,
yes.
What was incredible about the story of the cathedral as it emerged in Dallas, and in other metropolitan areas and worldwide, but certainly in Dallas, was that there were certain ingredients that really helped its growth. I mean, one of it was the religious sensitivities in the South.
Yes.
Religion here, rather than in Los Angeles, rather in metropolitan areas, is of such high significance.
Yes.
And a lot of gay lesbian people weren't ready to give up on their religion.
Right.
And so the cathedral, in some ways, was the only game in town that they could really possibly be. And at the same time, just a few years down the road, HIV/AIDS was about to be a part of the gay community. And so
So I'll delay that conversation just a little more to keep picking up on what you're saying here about the religious culture of Dallas and the fact that so many gay and lesbian Christians were in churches that were more conservative. And not finding that they had a sense of home any longer there. And we're trying to work out the connection between their spirituality and their sexuality, and hold on to their sense of salvation at the same time. I mean, I think that's, for many people that don't experience the existential nature of that challenge, this was very real to them. But probably something that people from the outside looking in don't know as much is just how conservative many of these Christians are. I mean, sexuality is one thing, but on the whole, a lot of people at Cathedral of Hope, in fact, are. This is not just a bastion of liberal theology, you might say. It's like every other group. It's a mixed group where there's a spectrum of convictions about things, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, to look out on a Sunday morning and see folks who have very diverse theological understandings of faith and salvation, and is it once saved, always saved? Is it faith by works or faith by? I mean, just the myriad of religious experience. We always kind of joke that the two largest groups of former denominations, if you will, of the folks who are in the cathedral are either former Roman Catholics or former Pentecostals.
Wow, yes. With a pretty strong group of Southern Baptists.
Absolutely.
Former Southern Baptists in there as well.
In the middle there.
Yes,
and so it's eclectic and challenging as well as exciting.
So let's now move to the AIDS crisis and what all of that meant. I mean, it was an incredibly important presence to have established a bulwark in Dallas, I would say, of a church like that at the time that the AIDS crisis hit. But what a period of mourning and grief and sadness. It was almost a chaplaincy to the city in a sense, wasn't it, Neil? It
was, and kudos to Michael Piazza, who was the lead pastor at that time, who really seized the challenge and galvanized the community and provided more memorials than we even are able to account for. This particular congregation was sometimes doing 2, 3, 4 memorials a day. Of men who were dying of AIDS, predominantly gay men who were dying of AIDS. And what was interesting again about that period was that in the gay community, lesbians and gay men very much separated themselves. And kudos to our lesbian women who really stepped up in that time, because the men were dying, and the women stepped up and they became our nurses, our providers, our healthcare providers, our mentors, our leaders in so many different ways. And it was just an incredible time of mourning, but also a time of really knowing what community looked like. And I every World AIDS Day, 1st of December every year, I always call upon the memory of our women who did so much. They staffed our helplines. They brought food when nurses wouldn't bring food into the hospitals. It was it was an incredibly sad time, and we really have now lost a whole generation of men. Who in the natural cycle of life were the mentors to the young folks who were coming up and who were coming out, and that whole generation almost extinct. I mean, almost left us.
So it's really part of the DNA now of your church in large measure. There's a sense of the lingering history of that ministry and those pioneers and the losses and whatnot that I think continue to be part of that. And yet the church keeps renewing itself and keeps finding new life and new hope on the other side of a crisis period like that. So you became part of the United Church of Christ, left the Metropolitan Community Church formally, and joined the United Church of Christ. Tell us more about the decision to become part of a more traditional mainline denomination.
Yeah, and I wasn't around in those
Right.
days. I'm sure there were numerous factors that contributed to that decision, but I think one of the factors was that the cathedral was in some ways moving beyond just this LGBT identity.
Yes.
At that time, and the Metropolitan Community Churches as a whole was not.
Right.
And so there was a decision ultimately to say, look, we're founded in, but we're moving beyond just
Yes.
an LGBT identity.
Right.
And so they left the Metropolitan Community Churches, which was, I was with Metropolitan Community Church since I was 15, so I knew the cathedral for many, many years before it left. And it was a great loss, and it was a great sadness at the time. And some aminosity, I'm sure, within the denomination. And then this congregation kind of wandered as an independent congregation for a short period of time as it explored where it wanted to sit. Did it want to just be an independent congregation, or did it want to be part of something that was bigger? And at that point, the only other denomination that was really doing any work around LGBT stuff and other justice stuff really was the United Church of Christ. And so they began that conversation, and as I say, about a decade or so ago, formally were received into covenant with the United Church of Christ, and that's where it sat for this last 12 or more years.
So you went from being, I guess, was it the largest metropolitan community church to now the fourth largest of the UCC churches, but you have a much broader communion now, in a sense. You have the UCC, United Church of Christ, has shared ministerial relationships with other denominations as well, and you're part of a much broader mainline Protestant tradition. So in a sense, you've gravitated toward the center of American Protestant religious life, you might say,
Yep.
while other church traditions, congregations, and denominations have been moving more also toward you
Yes.
in terms of LGBT inclusion and the like. So there's a kind of mainstreaming happening in all of this for everyone, in a sense, and certainly that's true of our congregation, as you know, in making that. And part of the real joy for us as a church has been the coming to know you all, and we'll talk more about that as we continue. But it's been a wonderful healing time and growing toward a kind of center that really is around Jesus Christ, around our common faith and confession, and not so much just around issues, but around our common faith.
Absolutely, I really do believe that, again, for such a time as this, that the cathedral, in its affirmation and reclaiming of Christianity for the LGBT community, really has been a gift both to the United Church of Christ, as it's also struggled to find its place around LGBT issues,
Yes.
and other denominations and other congregations locally who have been on that journey. And the cathedral now kind of talks about itself as a vibrant, inclusive, and progressive congregation.
Right.
And I think that the gift that we now offer, not just as a congregation here in Dallas and broadcasting worldwide, but I think also for those who are coming out of evangelical traditions,
Right.
not because they're LGBT, but for other reasons,
Yes.
who are seeking a place where they can reconcile their faith and their often rejection by the church.
Right. And it's important to say that while we've used the language of issues, like with LGBT, people are not issues.
No.
And this is sort of shorthand for some of the challenges that we face in terms of negotiating our social convictions in our faith. But as you say, there's a lot more going on in American Christianity today and in people's spiritual journeys, where it feels like the floor is shifting beneath us, and we're trying to find a place to stand as we negotiate these growing convictions of where would Jesus be in our time?
Yeah.
And with whom would he be, and with whom would he stand? Let's pick this up again after the break, Neil, and I want to talk more about your own journey and how you've come to this place in ministry. So we'll take a break and promote some nonprofit that is pretty dear to your heart.
Yes, thank you, George.
Okay.
Thank you.
Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square is a broad and diverse coalition of Dallas's faith leaders dedicated to service, hope, and a shared vision for North Texas. Faith Forward Dallas creates and supports a community of respect and compassion for all, sharing in the mission of the Thanksgiving Foundation to heal divisions and enhance mutual understanding.
We're back with Neil Cazares-Thomas, the senior pastor of Cathedral of Hope here in Dallas. Neil, we've been talking about the journey of your church, but that spiritual journey is also in some ways mirrored in your own journey spiritually. And I always love on this program to talk about people's sense of call to ministry, their own Christian experience and call. And yours is a fascinating one. Well, each of ours is, I suppose, really, if we listen carefully enough. But take us from growing up actually in England and in the Mormon faith and your family's experience and how all of that happened. I think people would be fascinated by this journey.
Well, it really is. When I look back, it's remarkable that I find myself where I am today.
Yes.
But I grew up in England on the south coast in a place called Bournemouth, right down on the beach. And my family was some of the early converts to Mormonism in the United Kingdom. People always say to me here, "Oh, they have Mormons in England?" And I say, yes, anything was more exciting than the Church of England at that time. But they were some of the early converts. And my mom and dad, I'm one of 7 kids.
Okay.
My twin brother and I are the youngest.
Okay.
And so we were all Mormons right the way through. When I was about 2 or 3 years of age, my mom and dad divorced, which was okay in the Mormon church. And my mom got custody of the church. And so we all stayed in the Mormon church. And, just like every family, a one-parent family, the Mormon church, I will say, were just incredible. They were, one of the things I love about the Mormon tradition is the way that they take care of each other, and certainly know how to do that well. And we certainly went through a lot of crises in our early childhood, and Mom is a single parent, and the church were just remarkable. And that I bring into my own life. But by the time I was about, I would say 7, 8, or 9, my mum had met someone who she wanted to marry, and she went to the Mormon bishop and said, I want to get married, and can we have the marriage ceremony here in the state, in the temple? And they basically said no. Because he was not a Mormon, and unless he was willing to convert to Mormonism, then there was no way there was going to be a wedding there. And so they eventually got married in a registry office in England. And we left the Mormon church at that point. I think my mom was at the point where it was like, I've dedicated my life to this particular church, to this denomination, and so she felt that rejection. Yes. And we left the Mormon church. What was ironic about that was that about 6 or 8 weeks later, my mum found out that the man she had married was already married.
Oh my goodness.
And so the wedding was annulled, but the damage was already done.
Yes.
But it taught me a really valuable lesson, George.
Go on.
And the valuable lesson was that churches are made up by human rules.
Yes. And
the church can be wrong. And I never realized at that point how important that message would be to me later on.
Well, because if you just stop and unpack that a little bit, here your mother had to choose between love and the church.
Yep.
And the church said that we know best about how you're supposed to express your love, and so that will find its way into the rest of your ministry.
Yep. And so, I was not done with my spirituality. I know my mother wasn't either, but it was so wrapped up in identity of church.
Yes.
And so we eventually moved up to London, and my mom, I think, quite frankly, was well over parenting at this point. She'd already parented 7 of us. And I found myself taking myself off to church on Sunday morning. I would go to a Baptist, not Southern Baptist, British Baptist, and Methodist and Anglican, and just found myself in churches on Sunday morning. morning.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was coming to a real deep understanding that I wasn't like my brothers and my sister, who were all out dating and getting married, and that I had same-sex attraction, and that I was interested in men rather than women.
Right.
And through a whole slew of circumstances, far too long to get into, by the time I was 14 and a half, close to 15, I was out of the closet. I'd already told people that I was gay. I was outed by my twin brother. I always like to tell him that. And I found myself just after my 15th birthday. It was either the 15th birthday or the week after. It was very close. Walking into my first Metropolitan Community Church back in my hometown in Bournemouth, England.
Wow.
And I walked in. There were 6 people. They were renting a room in a moose hall.
Wow.
It was the most bizarre worship experience I'd ever been to. But there was something about this group of people that reminded me of the Mormon Church, reminded me of my roots.
Okay.
And I felt home.
Yes.
And I stayed in that congregation all the way through my seminary education. I left school and went straight to seminary education. I was 18. I graduated when I was 22.
Wow.
Ordained when I was 23. And actually pastored that congregation.
Oh my goodness.
For 13 years after that.
Gee whiz. Well, what brought you to the States?
So about 10 or 12. So this was also during the AIDS pandemic that hit the UK. And so a lot of my time was spent as chaplain and building AIDS hospices and AIDS helplines, and at the same time doing a lot of work with homeless folk. I remember vividly being accused by the city council in Bournemouth of promoting homosexuality by feeding the homeless, and getting an apology from the city council.
Oh, really?
Eventually, being honoured by the Queen of England for services to the Bournemouth community, and just it was such a fruitful part of my ministry and formation of my ministry around justice.
Yes.
And about 10 or 11 years in, I got a call from our denominational headquarters in Los Angeles and said, have you thought about coming stateside? And I was, coming up on 35, and I thought, well, I'm still young enough to pick up and leave and go. And when I was eventually told that they would like me to consider the founding church, the church in Los Angeles, where Troy started it all, and Troy is still a member and still attends every Sunday.
Yes.
I was like, oh, hell to the no. It was like far too big a jump from this, small town in England to the metropolitan of Los Angeles. But eventually, I was elected and called to that position, and I was there for just on 13 years.
Right.
There's a kind of a pattern emerging.
13
and 13.
Okay, you've only been 3 here.
3
now,
here. So my plan is to retire out of this congregation.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Very good.
And so went to the MCC in Los Angeles and pastored there, and moved them 3 times for different reasons, mostly because we outgrew the space, or then was on a different trajectory. I was not necessarily looking to be the pastor of Cathedral.
Right.
There was some thought in me of becoming the new moderator of the MCCs once Nancy retired, and that shifted in my deep prayer.
Happily for all of us.
Well, and I just have to say, I love Dallas. I mean, there's real work to be done here.
Yes.
Los Angeles is great, but everyone, people have kind of got the progressive message there.
Right. Well, and I think you've come to Dallas at a really important time when things are being reshaped in our church and multi-faith community. And you're very involved with Faith Forward Dallas and with other ecumenical and interfaith and multi-faith sorts of groups. And so this is a really fruitful time for you to have come as we're exploring lots of new paths together.
As I say, it's a very exciting journey. And I tell you, the one thing that's, I keep saying this, and I really deeply mean it. For the first, at least decade and a half of my ministry, I was the belligerent minister who would always raise my hand and say, well, what about us? What about us? And silenced, quite frankly. Told that, I was going to go to hell, but were tolerating you by sitting at the back of the bus.
Yes.
And now, all these years later, I haven't changed that position, but I'm no longer being silenced. My voice is being encouraged and affirmed and lived into. And I have to keep pinching myself that this happens in a lifetime, because for many people,
Yes.
this is something that they leave as a legacy and somebody else picks up. And
Right.
I'm living the dream in so many different ways
Yes,
of
yes.
being able to be influential and to actually make a difference.
Well, and Neil, it's an interesting challenge that we have when we have conversation with people about these matters, because for some, this is a sure sign of the Holy Spirit's activity in the church and in the world, that the table is getting bigger. That there's more seats at the table, there's more room, and it's not just that we're at the table, but that we're also actually on the field, we're working together. For others, it's a sign of the spirit of the age and of culture diminishing the values and standards of the church, and it's hard to work that out with people of faith, isn't it? It's hard to help negotiate that conversation, isn't it?
It is difficult, and I think we live in a particular period of our history in this country where Christianity, has been hijacked, and Christianity has been hijacked by a political move that is about privilege and is often about white men.
Yes,
and I think it's more difficult these days to reconcile watching families separated at the border, and watching people go without health coverage, and and the Christian church, and I talked that about the dominant voice of the Christian church, not those of us who are perhaps on another side, but the dominant voice of the Christian church, almost either being silent or saying that this is God's will, and I don't know how you read our sacred text.
right.
How you worship a Jesus who was a refugee born into a manger on Christmas morning,
And fled to
Egypt,
as a refugee. And, yes.
and not see that the gospel compels us.
Yes.
I mean, it's not a choice; it's a compelling commandment
Right.
to love our neighbor.
Right.
So I think that there is I do believe that there's a reawakening in the church. And that regardless of where we fall on the sexuality spectrum, those issues aren't really important. The important thing is, did we I was naked and you clothed me. I was hungry and you fed me. And
It comes down to the very heart of our faith, and truly of all faiths, isn't it? That love God and love neighbor, the golden rule, somehow is at the heart of every one of our faiths. And for Christians to hear me say that, for some Christians, they would feel that that's sort of a watering down of the distinctiveness of our faith in Christ. But I think, the radical center, and the word radical actually doesn't mean fringe, it means to go right to the center, the core of our faith. That is what Jesus said was the heart of the law, and that's the good news that he has come to proclaim, the fact that God's love is unconditional and God's grace is for all, and that all are welcome through this path of God's irresistible and unconditional grace.
Yes.
It's an extraordinary good news, and we're called to live it.
We are called to live it, and when we fail to live it, or when we look at Christianity just through the Western lens, we miss the richness of the Great Commandment.
Right.
And it saddens me that we stand up so often in our churches and talk about God's blessing and how we live into that blessing without even realizing that the blessing is only given that we might share it.
That we might bless others.
Yes, yes.
Well, Neil, you are a blessing to me and to our Dallas community, and especially to the church. We're very grateful for your ministry and for your being here in Dallas with us now. And we have more conversation in another episode, but I'm just continuing to thank God for your presence and for your friendship.
Thank you. And the sentiment is absolutely returned. Thank
Terrific.
you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, George.
Okay.
Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square is a broad and diverse coalition of Dallas's faith leaders dedicated to service, hope, and a shared vision for North Texas. Faith Forward Dallas creates and supports a community of respect and compassion for all, sharing in the mission of the Thanksgiving Foundation to heal divisions and enhance mutual understanding.